Well, hey friends, welcome to Compass Online. My name is Daryl. I serve as one of the pastors here. You know, my wife Laura and I were recently at Home Depot, and we had a great conversation with a gal in customer service there named Joy. And each of us got to share a bit about our story, and then we got to share a little bit about our church. And not only did we tell her about the in-person location of our church that's closest to our house, but we told her about Compass Online, because we know this is a great space for us to connect with each other and to connect with God. You know, we're trying to help people find and follow God. As things would have it, 2 days later, a friend of ours who also goes to the Compass Church was at the same Home Depot in the same customer service line, got talking with Joy, and she found out that he had a connection to Compass Church as well. And she was like, what's going on around here? I'm feeling pursued by God. And that's exactly what's happening. Friends, when it comes to building the things that matter most, the things that last in this world, it's not about Home Depot. It's about His church, and God's doing some amazing things. Did you know that in the scriptures, it says that we're being built together as one spiritual house with one spiritual lifestyle to honor Him? And so let's do a little bit of that together right now. Let's rejoice in Him together in singing.
The God who is, we worship the God who evermore will be. He opened the prison doors, He parted the raging sea. My God, He holds the victory. There's joy in the house of the Lord. There's joy in the house of the Lord today, and we won't be quiet. We shout out your praise. There's joy in the house of the Lord. Our God is surely in this place, and we won't be quiet. We shout out your praise. Oh, oh, we shout out your praise. Oh, oh, we sing to the God who heals. We sing to the God who saves. We sing to the God who always makes a way. 'Cause He hung up on that cross, then He rose up from that grave. My God, still rolling stones away. There's joy in the house of the Lord. There's joy in the house of the Lord today, and we won't be quiet. We shout out your praise. There's joy in the house of the Lord. Our God is surely in this place, and we won't be quiet. We shout out your praise. We were the beggars, now we're royalty. We were the prisoners, now we're running free. We are forgiven, accepted, redeemed by His grace. Let the house of the Lord sing praise. We were the beggars, now we're royalty. We were the prisoners, now we're running free. We are forgiven, accepted, redeemed by His grace. Let the house of the Lord sing praise. There's joy in the house of the Lord. There's joy in the house of the Lord today. We won't be quiet. We shout out your praise. There's joy in the house of the Lord.
Welcome back to the Compass Church and the land of Egypt. Friends, I want to welcome everybody who's at our Three Rivers campus, Bolingbrook people, Wheaton, Naperville, South Naperville, and online. Today, we are down by the Great Wrigley Field, by Graceland Cemetery, and specifically at the mausoleum of the Schoenhofen family. Schoenhofen family. I need to tell you about Peter Schoenhofen. Years ago, he immigrated from Germany to Chicago at the age of 24. And his area of expertise was brewing beer. He founded the Schoenhofen Brewing Company, and they did quite well, actually. They were making lots of money selling beer until 1919. You know what happened in that year, friends? The Prohibition. Alcohol became illegal through our entire nation. And as a result, the Schoenhofen family went from success to failure overnight. In a place of sure bankruptcy and panic, they came up with an idea. They started taking their empty beer bottles and making a green soda called Green River. Would you know that Green River exploded in popularity and became the #1 selling soft drink in Chicagoland? No kidding. It was outselling Coca-Cola and Pepsi. And so they went from wealth to poverty to wealth again. And when this family turned to the grave, they built this amazing mausoleum, hired a famous architect to design this granite artifice in the shape of a pyramid with a Christian angel, just to make sure they were clearly not abandoning the Christian roots, but an Egyptian sphinx as well. What was the fascination with Egypt? Well, here's what it is. When tycoons died, they often wanted to be remembered forever, like the pharaohs of Egypt. That's what pyramids were all about. That's what mausoleums were all about. They're a monument that cries, "I'm significant and don't forget me." Let's talk about that just for a moment, shall we? Like, for example, the Great Pyramid of Giza. The three of them, actually, that sit at that location, they are all part of the Khufu family. Friends, the idea of a pyramid was, let's build something so massive that it declares the greatness of our power and wealth. The Great Pyramid, for example. Do you know that they worked on that for 27 years, employing 20,000 workers? If you start calculating the cost of that, well, use minimum wage, for example. That turns out to be a building of a cost of $15 billion in modern day money. Why? All to announce, both in the present and for ages to come, that Khufu was significant at the highest level. Not only its cost, but its grandeur. Again, that pyramid stands at 50 stories tall, like a 50-story skyscraper. Can you believe that? And not only its grandeur, it's lasting. See, the idea of a pyramid is that it would last for a long time. In fact, the shape of a pyramid is a structural shape that is of highest stability, with these stones so massive and solid, cut to precise precision. Do you know you can't even get a credit card to fit between the stones of those pyramids? That's why they've lasted for 4,600 years. Friends, talk about lasting. They are the final, there were 7 wonders of the ancient world. Well, the Great Pyramid of Giza is the only one that still exists to this day. By making them lasting monuments, the pharaohs were guaranteeing that they wouldn't be forgotten. that their greatness would be proclaimed throughout the millennia. That's kind of what a mausoleum's all about. It's like, I'm important and I want you to remember me. Please, long after I'm gone, remember me. If you will, pyramids, mausoleums, they're all a grasp at lasting value. I want to talk about lasting value. You know, companies will sometimes advertise that they provide products or services that will contribute lasting value. Do you know we all long for lasting value? We long for value. We want to know that we matter, that we're significant, that we're somebody. That's what the mausoleums are proclaiming, the pyramids are proclaiming. I'm a somebody. And we want lasting value. To be a somebody for a short little window and then to lose that fame, you know, just like the Schoenhoffens, they had significance and wealth and success as brewers, but then with Prohibition, that was lost. They recovered it. And even in death, they don't want us to forget the Schoenhoffen name. I want to be a VIP. I want to matter forever. God made us to crave lasting value. But here's the question. Is lasting value found in monuments of granite, or is there a better way? Friends, it is time to study the great Joseph of Egypt. You know, every one of us wants our lives to be of lasting value. We want to matter, and we want to matter for a long time. So I was thinking about this lasting value and asking myself, what prop will help us remember that we're talking about having lasting value? And I thought of gold. As it turns out, gold was first treasured in Egypt. Turned out the Egyptians looked at this beautiful metal that doesn't corrode, and they said, let's make jewelry out of it. And this is going back to like 4,000 years ago. And friends, ever since then, gold has been a precious commodity. And so with this precious commodity that's high in value and has been for thousands of years, I thought it's a great picture of lasting value. It's interesting, we'll read where God says, you people are my treasure, my gold. God sees us like gold. We have lasting value in his eyes. Well, we're going to learn today about Joseph. Remember, we're looking at the 6 events that take place in Egypt in the Bible. Last week it was Abraham. Well, Joseph is Abraham's great-grandson. Let me remind you of how Joseph ends up in Egypt. He's one of 12 boys, and he's treasured by his father Jacob as his favorite son. And there's a lot of favoritism going on that drives his brothers bonkers with jealousy. They are so angry at Joseph, so jealous of him, that they decide to get rid of him. And they find some slave traders that are coming through the land and heading for Egypt. So they sell their brother to these traders who bind him and drag him to Egypt and sell him to an Egyptian named Potiphar. So Joseph ends up in Egypt, but in a terrible situation. He's the property of another. While serving Potiphar, he is accused of a crime that he didn't commit, but it gets him in prison. I mean, can it get any worse? While in prison, Joseph makes a friend with a guy named the cupbearer. He used to work for the king. In fact, one day, this cupbearer is freed from prison and restored to his position working for Pharaoh. When Pharaoh has a dream that he believes has got to be meaningful, no one around can interpret the dream. That's when the cupbearer brings up Joseph to Pharaoh. The cupbearer says, I know a guy. I befriended him in some dark days when I was in prison. Well, anyways, that guy I met named Joseph, can interpret the meaning of dreams. Pharaoh says, well, get him. And Joseph is pulled out of prison, brought to the king of Egypt. And sure enough, Joseph interprets the dream. The dream regarded a horrible famine that was coming. And because of Joseph's capacity to interpret that dream, grain was stored up and Egypt was saved. Joseph becomes a national hero in the most powerful country in the world at that time. In fact, not just a hero, Pharaoh promotes Joseph to the highest position he could. I want to read to you the description of Joseph's position. This is in Genesis chapter 41, starting in verse 41. It says, Pharaoh said to Joseph, I hereby put you in charge of the whole land of Egypt. Pharaoh put his signet ring on Joseph's finger. He dressed him in robes of fine linen and put a gold chain around his neck. He had him ride in a chariot as his second in command. And people shouted before him, make way. Friends, that make way, that's the expression you'd give towards someone of crazy importance. Can you imagine Joseph in this royal chariot driving through Egypt, people falling before him saying, make way to the great Joseph of Egypt. This position of a second in command is one that is well demonstrated in Egyptian history. Sure enough, when we research, we find that Pharaoh would have a title he called vizier, and the vizier was second in command only to him, and the vizier really ran the country. We see him say, I'm going to put you in charge of the whole land of Egypt. Pharaoh was too busy doing public appearances to do any work of politics. And so he hired somebody to run the country. It's kind of like the prime minister in England. England has a king, but the one who runs the day-to-day operations of the nation is the prime minister. That's the role Joseph had. And friends, it was wildly famous and popular. That person, the vizier, would be treated as royalty of a very high order. In fact, there are tombs, ornate tombs, decorated in Egypt for the vizier. The pharaoh and the queen, they got the biggest tombs. But the next one behind them is the role Joseph enjoyed. He was rich beyond his wildest dreams. Power, fame, he had it all. With everybody telling you how valuable you are, I'm sure Joseph was tasting value of a sort. You ever felt people telling you how special you are? I have that privilege. I don't mean to make you jealous, but I am going to show you something in my wallet. And it is my Mileage Plus Premier Silver status. Friends, some years back, I flew on missions trips enough miles that I was promoted to better than most with United Airlines. I will tell you about this. This is awesome. I discovered advantages that some got that I never knew. First of all, when you have this premier status, they give you free baggage. You know, you got to pay crazy amount for your suitcase, which is ridiculous, but not for me. Free baggage, please. I got priority boarding. You know, come on, Mr. Griffin, you come on before everybody else. Before I boarded the plane, I found out there's a VIP lounge for people like me where food and drinks and leather chairs are available. You know, the ordinary folk are not allowed to even gaze into that domain, but we premier people, we got it. And then they would give me complimentary upgrades where I got like, hey, why don't you come up to first class, Mr. Griffin, because you're special to us. It's a good way to live. Here's the problem. My card, I didn't know this, but it says expires January of 2016. Wouldn't you know, this only lasted me for 1 year, and I was reduced back down to the normal population. I wish I would have never known what it was like. I bring up this particular illustration because it reminds us that we don't just want value, we want lasting value. You know, some people, I think of actors or sports celebrities. So often they have this window of greatness and fame, and quickly it's pulled from them. And later in life, they're reduced to ordinariness. What we crave, what Joseph craved, because he's only human, is to be valued, but not for a season, to be valued forever. Friends, I want to show you the pivotal verses that our passage is really based on. And as it turns out, they're the last two verses of the book of Genesis. I mean, Genesis is this massive, epic drama, 50 chapters, and yet the last two verses are words about Joseph, words from Joseph that are just huge. Let's take a look, shall we? Genesis chapter 50, verses 25 and 26. Joseph made the Israelites swear an oath. And you should know that when it says Israelites here, he's simply speaking of his family. Israel was another name for Jacob, his dad, and his brothers and their families. This group were already starting to be called the Israelites, the children of Israel. Joseph made the Israelites swear an oath, and he said, God will surely come to your aid, and then you must carry my bones up from this place. So Joseph died at the age of 110, and after they embalmed him, he was placed in a coffin in Egypt. You know, in some ways, this seems like a very typical Egyptian death. They embalmed him. That's where they pull out your organs and dry out your body and mummify you. Joseph was turned into a mummy, and they put him into a coffin, an Egyptian coffin. Here I think of King Tut, you know, and his glorious coffin that was discovered. Joseph was put in one like that, but his death turns from the Egyptian tradition sharply when he says, I don't want to stay in this land. When the Israelites leave Egypt, I want my bones to go with them. I want to go to the land of Canaan and be buried there. Remember, it was so Egyptian to build a monument that would last forever, proclaiming to those in the distant future how great you were. And Joseph said, nope, no pyramid for me. And his position of vizier was of the level that he should have had a huge grave. But Joseph said, I don't want one. I'm not interested in the lasting value of the Egyptians. I've got a different lasting value in mind. And sure enough, we read later, I won't read it to you now, but I'll just tell you that in Exodus 13, that's the great Exodus, when all the Jewish slaves are freed, this is hundreds of years after Joseph. On that night, Moses said, it was a frantic night, you may recall, the night of the Passover when Pharaoh finally said after the 10th plague, get out. Well, they were frantic, no time to raise the bread. And Pharaoh said, somebody get Joe's bones. Literally, as they fled as escapees out of Egypt, somebody had to go and find the box that had the bones of their ancestor Joseph and take them with, because they had sworn by oath that they would. And then later, still yet, in Joshua chapter 24, we find that when the Israelites finally moved into Canaan, they came to the city of Shechem. You may recall Shechem was the first city consecrated for God by Abraham in last week's text. It was Shechem where Joseph's bones were buried in the land of God as he had desired. This decision not to be buried with a monument Egyptian style, but rather be buried in Canaan, this is the decision that made Joseph qualified for the Hall of Fame. Remember last week with Abraham, we learned about Hebrews 11, this chapter that's like a Hall of Fame, a spiritual version of it. Joseph got in there as well, and all the great things that he did, it was this decision about his death and his burial that made him qualified for this great haul. Let me read it to you. Hebrews 11, verse 22. By faith, Joseph, when his end was near, he spoke about the exodus of the Israelites from Egypt and gave instructions concerning the burial of his bones. According to the writer of Hebrews, the most amazing thing about Joseph was that he took a pass on the Egyptian monument and had his final resting place be Canaan. He chose, it is amazing, the Israelites at that time were a ragtag group of refugees, of misfits living in a foreign land. And Joseph said, they're my peeps, and I want my heritage, my reputation to be linked to them, not to Egypt, which was the most amazing empire in the world at the time. They were so powerful, and Joseph's second in command in that land. His decision to take a pass on what's obviously awesome and be identified with the misfits, it's puzzling, but it's enlightening and showing us that Joseph understood a better kind of lasting value than any monument could bring. I want to go back to Hebrews 11, verse 22, and show you something that you may not have noticed. It says, by faith, when his end was near, Joseph spoke about the exodus of the Israelites. This is a reference to our passage, the last two verses of Genesis. When did he speak about the Exodus? The Exodus being that great escape. Let's go back to our two passages and see if we can see it. Genesis chapter 50, looking specifically at verse 25. Joseph made the Israelites swear an oath and said, God will surely come to your aid. That's a reference to the Exodus. Joseph was saying, you people are going to need aid. How did he know that they were going to need aid? Joseph was a student of what his great-grandfather had shared. Abraham, his great-grandfather, back in Genesis 15, received a prophecy from God that one day his family would be slaves in a distant land, but that God would rescue them and take them back to Canaan. Joseph knew about that, and he believed it. He said, I know right now it looks like my family's doing fantastic in Egypt because everybody loves me, and so they love my family. But Joseph said, I know from the prophecy of God that a day's going to come when they're going to need aid. And you know what? I believe God's going to come to their aid. Friends, this knowledge of Joseph about the future exodus, this great rescue that God would bring, that knowledge helped him understand a better lasting value system. What do I mean? Well, Joseph knew I could either be identified as someone great in the Egyptian kingdom, but I know that when the great exodus occurs, the people will leave Egypt, God's people. They will go to Canaan, and God has promised my great-grandfather Abraham that my people will be an amazing nation. And I want to be great in God's nation, not Pharaoh's nation. Isn't that fascinating? It's a better value system. In fact, there's a wonderful verse in Exodus 19. It's all about the Exodus, and God says in that verse that I rescued you and took you on eagle's wings and brought you to myself, and you are my treasured possession. This rescue of God demonstrates how precious his people are to him. And the phrase treasured possession, the Hebrew word there is segula, which means a king's treasure, the gold of a king. God says, I will rescue you and prove that you're my gold. You're my segula. And Joseph is saying, you know what I want? I want to be valued in God's eyes. I don't care if the people of Egypt value me. What matters to me is being valued to God. I wonder with you, do you want to be valued by the eyes of the people of this world? Do you want to be famous and impressive to them? Or would you rather be valued to God? Friends, I would tell you the better place to be valued is in the eyes of God. We should get to a place where we say, you know what, I really don't care if the people of this world think I'm something. I care about the creator of the world, the King of all kings. I want him to say that I am precious beyond what words can say. Joseph knew about the Exodus. And Joseph knew that the future rescue of God's people was going to proclaim how precious they were to him. Joseph is like, I think there's a better value system, and that's the value system of God. Now, he also understands that God's preciousness is of lasting value. In fact, God had spoken to Abraham in Genesis 17 and said, this kingdom that I'm building, it's going to be everlasting. He uses the word a few times, everlasting. And Joseph knew that promise to his great-grandfather Abraham. And so Joseph's like, yeah, Egypt's great, but it's not going to always be great. But the kingdom of God will always be great. And friends, there is a value for us in God's eyes that can last forever. When you're adopted into the family of God, that's a family that never ends. That's a value that will endure past the great empires of this world when they're long gone. And so Joseph said, bury me with the misfits called Israelites. They're my peeps. And that's where I find my lasting value, not in the monuments of the great of Egypt. I thought about a way to illustrate this, and I thought I know who to tell my friends about. I'm going to show you something, and I wonder if you know what it is. Friends, this is a bat, and do you know what sport it's for? It's for the sport of cricket. We don't know much about cricket, but it's wildly popular in England and India, and it's a much older game than our baseball. And I want to tell you about a guy named C.T. Studd, who was the greatest cricket player of his day. Now, his day was a long time ago. He lived back at the end of the 1800s in London. His fame in cricket began back when he was in college in Cambridge. He was the number one cricket player and led Cambridge to all these great championships. And then he went pro. He was in his first year of being a professional, and he was already dominating all of the stats. And so everyone loved C.T. Studd. I mean, what a name, for an athlete. He was a stud. And he was just enjoying fame and then fortune. They didn't get paid as much as athletes today, but it didn't matter because at the age of 22, C.T. Studd inherited this vast fortune from his father early on. And so he was a millionaire already. 22-year-old enjoying fortune and fame and just the top accomplishments in his art. And then he walked away from the game at 22 years old. People were shocked. What's going on? And I need to tell you what was going on. As it turns out, when he was 22, his brother got deathly ill. His brother was also a professional cricket player, not quite as good or famous as C.T., but he looked at his brother as his brother lay on his deathbed. And he just had a profound encounter with God, where God says, do you see how fleeting what you've been chasing is? Here's your brother who's got all this stuff you've been trying to enjoy. And now in death, you realize that it just all vanishes. C.T. wrote in his journal that I realize cricket doesn't last. Death is so close and eternity at hand. And so fame doesn't last. He said, fortune doesn't last. Nothing in this life lasts. And then he made this famous statement. Only one life will soon be past. Only what's done for Christ will last. And C.T. Studd had a flash of insight as to what is lasting value. And at his prime, he walked away from this game. And he gave away his fortune. At 22 years old, he gave away his $1 million. He gave it to Christian ministry. The number one recipient was Moody Bible Institute in the great city of Chicago. And he walked away from the land of England where he was famous and became a missionary in China at the age of 22. Lived the rest of his life in obscurity, serving the people of God and an ambassador of God in foreign lands. C.T. Studd. Was he crazy? Most people would say so. He gave up the lasting value of this world. And like Joseph, he said, no, I know a better lasting value, and that's a life given in devotion to a kingdom that will never die, the kingdom of Jesus Christ. We've all got a choice to make, don't we? Where are we going to hitch our wagon? What system are we going to try to establish our value? Are you going to pursue the things of this world and desperately try to prove you matter? Or like Joseph, are you going to say, bury me with the people of God? I am going to devote my life to the King of Kings. And I just want to be valuable in His eyes. I want to center my priorities around His cause because I know that the people, the servants of the living God, are the segula, His treasure, both now and for all eternity. I pray you have the wisdom to, again, professional sports, it's not that doing the things of this world are wrong. You don't have to give it up as C.T. Studd did. But you have to say, I don't find my value here. I find it in the eyes of God, both now and always. Friends, will you turn with me in prayer? God, we ask that you will help us not chase after being important in the world's eyes, but to follow the example of Joseph and say, I'm going with God. All I care about is being precious to Him, both now and forever. God, may we prioritize your value system, your cause, and care about what you think of us more than what others think of us. That's what we pray, and we pray this in Christ's name. Folks, we got a great song to close with. It's one like C.T. Studd who just said, take my life. I don't care about the fame of this world, Lord. I am all available to your kingdom. This song celebrates that.
Narrow as the road may seem, I'll follow where your spirit leads. Broken as my life may be, I will give you every piece. I hear you
Friends, it's been a joy to spend this time with you. And maybe you're feeling like you're responding to that song that we just sang, or that message from Jeff where you say, Lord, I want to be available to you. I want to be available to your cause. You know, you can go to our website. There's a section there about serving. Perhaps there's a serving role for you with Compass Online or with one of our in-person locations. And then thank you. So many of you give financially to the ministries of Compass Church, helping us connect with people here, near, and far. In fact, on the screen here, you see some of the ways that you can engage financially. Many have given generously and sacrificially to take these ministries forward. And friends, you're going to want to be with us next week. We're going to have a special guest host you aren't going to want to miss. And we're going to continue in this Egypt teaching series, A Line in the Sand. We're going to talk about difficult decision moments that test where our loyalties really lie. Friends, we'll see you again then. God bless.